All right, back to our top story. Memphis police released the body camera video showing the brutal beating of Tyre Nichols. His mom describes her grief after the death of her son.
I felt a lot of pain and discomfort in my stomach. And at the time, I didn't realize what it was. But once I found out, then I just said that was my son's pain that I was feeling.
Here to react, the author of a brand new memoir, Straight Shooter, Stephen A. Smith. My friend, it's been a long time.
It's been a long time, man. It's good to see you.
Good to see you. You know, we were going to have you today to talk about Straight Shooter, and we can touch on it a bit later. But in the wake of this incident, in the wake of the video and the protests last night, you were no better guest to hear from this morning than Stephen A. Smith. It
was an atrocity. There's no question about it. My heart goes out to Tyre Nichols' family, of course, him. He was tortured. He was beaten. And as far as I'm concerned, second-degree murder doesn't begin to touch on what these officers deserve. They took his life. And as far as I'm concerned, the 5 officers involved, their life should be taken, meaning they should be in prison for the rest of their lives. I don't know whether that will happen. Of course, we'll let the judicial system reach that conclusion. But what I wanted people to remember was that if you're watching these videos, and I watched all 66 minutes of it, if you watch the video, with the body cam, there is a significant chunk of time where you can't see what is going on, but you hear the officers screaming, put your hands behind your back and all of this other stuff. They already had him restrained. They already had him in their possession. Then the surveillance cam from across the street is what caught them. You saw 2 officers holding him down. You saw another officer come and kick him in the face twice. You saw another officer come out of nowhere and grab the nightstick or the baton, whatever word you want to use, and struck him at least twice. They beat him to death. There is no way around it. And as far as I'm concerned, obviously something needs to be done, but I do think it's important to call for peaceful protests and to recognize the fact that the system itself appears to be working the way it always should. They were immediately fired. They were immediately indicted, okay? The charges have been placed against them, and the process has been expedited, and it's moved with the quickness, and I'm very happy about that.
You know, that's what I wanted to talk to you about. And look, you and I have a long history of having honest disagreement with one another on various serious issues.
Absolutely.
There is universal agreement, I think, right now. This is horrific. It's an injustice, and more than that, it's a crime.
Yes.
When you see this incident, Stephen A., do you see the indictment of a few bad apples in a police department, individuals, or do you see something systemic, a problem here that needs to be addressed at a larger level?
I definitely think it's systemic, but that doesn't mean that all police officers would do this. Where the systemic part comes in is the fact that you had 5 police officers. Nobody stops you. And so what we're looking at, of course, there's a few bad apples. Of course, not every police officer would do this. Of course, this is a stain on the men in blue, people who've sworn, men and women, people who've sworn to protect and serve, and nobody should castigate them as a group. But as a black man, what you're saying is that when this kind of stuff happens, call them out, because if you're going to stand by and do nothing, you're a part of the problem. If you're somebody that's wearing that blue uniform, you should feel just as bad, if not worse, towards those police officers who did this, because they stain you. They really impugn your integrity and what you stand for. And you have to be just as diligent as you expect American citizens and, dare I say, a jury of our peers to be. Black folks put black folks in jail all the time. We do not hesitate. So what we want everybody else to do from different ethnicities, different communities, is to do the same. When you're wrong, you're wrong. Deal with it on that level.
Do you see this in any way as an issue of race?
Well, I do see it as an issue of race in this regard, in terms of what has happened to the young black man. We don't see this happening to white individuals. Now, if it has happened and we haven't seen it, we haven't seen it. Maybe they need to show us more of that. But the reality of the situation is that when you're talking about unarmed individuals who are getting beat up or brutalized by police officers, they're usually black men. In that regard, that's the race issue. But with Freddie Gray in Baltimore, some of those officers were black. It wasn't just white officers that did that to Gray, to Freddie Gray. There were black officers, too. I'm talking about race from a victim's perspective. The victims are usually black unarmed males. When that issue happens, when it's unarmed males, it's usually young black males that this happens to.
And how do you explain that?
Well, I think that from a systemic perspective, we think about the way black folks in this country are, the kind of messages that are disseminated to the masses about us, how we're depicted plays a role. And obviously, that doesn't mean that there is some legitimacy to it on a case-by-case basis. But the important
or
words
broader statistics, when an officer goes into an involvement,
That's right.
he understands as well the neighborhood I'm in, the
That's right.
prevalence for the crime that could be
Exactly.
committed. So a lot of that's playing into.
It plays into it all, and we understand that. But at the end of the day, that's why training comes into play. That's why, see, I've never been a proponent of defunding the police. Absolutely not. As far as I'm concerned, throw more money into law enforcement, except, you do that so they can receive the proper training and to make sure they know how to navigate their way through all of this. Just like Dan Bongino said when he came on a bit earlier, you're not trained to do what we saw transpire.
No.
Those are guys that are rogue. Highlight those individuals, but if you're a part of the police force and you've been trained and you know to do better, then part of your obligation is to stop your contemporaries, your colleagues from engaging in such heinous acts. The fact that nobody stopped it, we had just the 5 officers that were arrested. What about the other officers who came to the scene? They did nothing. They did nothing. What about the EMT workers? You came 10 minutes later. You were slow to address the concerns that were clearly obvious. So when you see stuff like that happens, there's something systemic to it. I'm not an expert. I'm not going to pretend to be. So I'm not going to go any further than that. But I'm looking at what most American people are looking at today. We're appalled. It's a heinous act. As far as I'm concerned, there should have been first-degree murder charges. And who's to say that's not going to happen down the road? They tortured and beat this kid to death. They have got to pay.
You and I will continue this conversation and many more about your life, about Straight Shooter, your rise to stardom at ESPN and beyond on the Will Cain podcast, which comes out this coming Monday. I know you went live last night on the No Mercy podcast, which you can check out at YouTube and wherever you get your podcast. Get Unfiltered Stephen A., which you always get. And you check out Straight Shooter as well, the memoir of your rise.
Appreciate it.
To stardom, brother. Good to see you again.
Good to see you.